The Journey of Meaning, Part 10. We live too quickly to see. The flow of mountains and the three clocks of time. There are the characteristics of the everyday that we don't perhaps know or understand, or at least not on a widespread basis. Take mountains, for example. They contain a secret that we couldn't possibly have known for the entirety of human existence until very recently. Geologists will tell you that rock flows like water. Mountains flow, but only on a much grander timescale. We tend to think of mountains as the opposite of rivers. Rivers flow, but mountains stay where they are. But this is largely an illusion created by the timescale through which we experience them. Imagine an impossible time-lapse camera fixed on a mountain range for 20 or 30 million years and then played back over a few minutes. The rock would begin to look almost like water, rising and falling, buckling and folding, peaks appearing and being worn away, whole ranges moving like enormous waves. The Himalayas are doing this now as India continues to press into Eurasia, while rivers, glaciers, rain and gravity carry the mountains away. Rock that was once beneath an ocean becomes a summit. The summit becomes sand and sediment, and the sediment becomes rock, and perhaps hundreds of millions of years later, another mountain. Change the clock and the distinction between the solid and the flowing begins to blur. Mountains are really something like waves frozen to the spot. The freezing is in our perception, but not in the mountains. And if I abandon my Western concept of time and contemplate just for a moment how time is measured in Indian cosmology, this is where it becomes utterly overwhelming. A kalpa, the day of Brahmā, traditionally lasts 4.32 billion human years, followed by a night of the same duration. Viewed through a clock like that, then even geology speeds up. Mountain ranges rise and disappear, oceans open and close, continents assemble and break apart. What seems permanent may only seem so because our lives are desperately short. A river moves quickly enough for us to see it flowing. A mountain does not. Hindu cosmology stretches the imagination until worlds themselves become temporary, emerging, enduring, dissolving, and emerging again. Shiva's cosmic dance is particularly evocative because Shiva is also associated with Mount Kailash, the apparent embodiment of immovability. Yet the mountain is dancing too. We simply live too quickly to see it. In human time, the mountain is permanence. In geological time, it is movement. And in kalpic time, it is scarcely more than a passing wave. And then there is the Pixar short Lava with ukulele, which compresses millions of years into a few minutes and somehow makes all of this painfully human. Uku ages and sinks towards the sea while Lele rises from beneath it. Mountains acquire lives because we are finally allowed to see them according to their own clock. For me, though, the film has become inseparable from another time scale, the 2010s, when the kids were young. I spent far too much of that horribly finite time working ungodly hours trying to satisfy toxic, bullying clients in places like New York, and I waited far too long to change those circumstances. I feel robbed of some of that time. And so the flow of mountains and volcanoes, as illustrated in Lava, now seems to contain three clocks: the kalpic clock, on which worlds and galaxies disappear; the geological clock, on which mountains flow, and like the song says, they crumble into the sea; and the human clock, on which the bringing up of children unfolds and then vanishes. That last clock is the cruelest because that time races. The sands of that hourglass fall so quickly, so cruelly, far too brutally obedient to gravity. Why does it have to be so? Could gravity not just once have disobeyed its own law? Could a few grains not have got stuck so that there's still some time left? I don't want eternity. I would just want some of that time back when the kids were young, just for a moment, just a short while. I digress though. Let's get back to metaphor. So cultural worldviews are not static, they can change over time. While the physical world stays exactly the same, people begin paying attention to completely different things. A mountain range like the Alps are a good example of this. Today we see them as a place of breathtaking beauty. They represent freedom, adventure, escape and nature. However, for much of history, what people saw in the mountains was something very different. They were dangerous, freezing, difficult to cross and full of risk. They separated communities, slowed down trade and occasionally entire armies, and threatened travellers. Just ask Ötzi, the 5,000-year-old man, about that. They were obstacles to negotiate around rather than landscapes to admire. The mountains themselves never changed, but what did change was the relationship that people had with them. Improvements in transport primarily encouraged us to notice different things. Danger gave way to beauty. The obstacles themselves became destinations. People were not just surviving anymore. Forests and seas underwent similar transformations from places of danger to places of well-being. So maybe what we notice about the world is never fixed but changes over time. Maybe the hardness of stone that we see now as the most salient feature of stone in the English-speaking world may not have been what Paleolithic peoples noticed in the same object. And given that stone was the primary tool at the time, this would have almost certainly been the case. Thank you for listening. This was originally written by Mark Gibson, Kielder, United Kingdom, August 2026. Copyright asserted by Mark Gibson.